Welcome to Therapy Inspired. As therapists, we have a unique view of the world. We hold space for grief and trauma, yet we also witness resilience and healing, all while being humans ourselves. We hope to share helpful psychoeducational insights from our world as psychotherapists in and out of the therapy room. And while we'll be talking about things therapy related, listening and engaging in this podcast doesn't equate a client therapist relationship. And though we might be using insights from our work with various clinical issues, we don't reference specific cases.
Hi, I'm Kameela Osman. I'm a registered social worker and a psychotherapist with a practice in Bowmanville where I see in-person clients as well as a virtual practice throughout Ontario. I do also supervise other clinicians.
My name is Darby Crosby, and I'm a registered psychotherapist. I'm on the Registry for Marriage and Family Therapy. I have a virtual clinic in Ontario, seeing individuals, couples, and families. I also offer supervision services to other clinicians. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the intimacy equation, balancing emotional and physical connections. Emotional intimacy is sort of the foundation of our relationships. This is what gives it the sort of the base, the anchor of that relationship. And while, sometimes we get busy at work or with children or whatever, the more that we can put attention to this foundation of emotional and physical sort of connections, the more it builds trust, deepens sort of love, and it sustains long-term closeness. So we need to be able to strengthen that emotional intimacy as well as the physical. So if we can create a place where both partners can feel safe to share openly, where they're not going to be judged by what they're saying or their emotions being dismissed by anything, where we can actually, show warmth and reassurance when needed. So sometimes, we can even say, like, I really want to talk about something. Something's been really bothering me, right? So that we're letting our partners know that this is something that they need to understand, that I want to communicate something, and that they need to be sort of receptive to that, if that would, because then it's less likely to create tension.
So some ways of creating some of that emotional safety is by diving into meaningful conversation in the day to day. And so going beyond the how are you, and we're not divulging how are we really doing, slowing down and responding authentically. I'm not doing so great. And it's not just an okay or not so good, I'm tired, but a little bit more. We can share a little bit about what's going on in our day to day. Ask each other open-ended questions if we know that something was happening for our partner, checking in a little bit. How did that thing go? And then in other moments, we might be able to dive a little bit deeper. This is something that I'm hoping to do. And I, want you to know that this is on my mind, or how do you feel about if sometimes we take that trip, or I envision this vision for, the home that we live in. These are some fears that have been on my mind with our life or our kids, or this is something that happened to me in my childhood that's been on my mind for some time. And so deepening those day-to-day conversations creates closeness and some of that intimate connection.
And I think we also need to practice what's called emotional attunement with our partners. Parents do it with their children. They can read their children. Uh-oh, that's the tired cry. That's the hungry cry. We need to do the same thing with our partners, like looking at their emotional cues, their body language. And if they seem a little bit off, how can we ask about that? You seem sort of a little bit preoccupied. Do you want to talk about something? Did something happen at work? Because that not only shows that we are reading our partners, but it also shows that we care, and their feelings and their behaviors matter to us. And that's a very important piece.
Yeah. And I know we've been focusing more on the emotional side, but sometimes that is a path of balancing it. It can be, I often say with couples, working on it in parallel. And so we're not just working on sex and intimacy with physical intimacy, we're also working on the emotional intimacy at the same time. And when we're working on emotional intimacy, to not forget working on some of that physical intimacy. And so we can explore in terms of deepening emotional connection, explore deepening affection. And affection can exist with physical touch, but also without physical touch. And so affection might be some of those verbal affirmations. I love the way you make me laugh. It might be, coming back to love languages. So different ways of showing love to our partner. So an act of service. I'm leaving a kind note. I'm making their favorite meal, a thoughtful gesture in that way, or some of those words of affirmation. I am sharing, what I appreciate about that person. And so small affections, small daily efforts can make a big difference for deepening that emotional intimacy and may pour over into that physical intimacy.
Absolutely. And sometimes, we need to show our own vulnerability first. Like we need to sort of say, I had a really bad day today, and I really need some support, or I need a hug. Like all of those things make a difference. And sharing that with our partners creates that openness and that safety, right? And when we feel open, we feel safe, and we feel connected, we're more likely to sort of talk about things and also to express our feelings physically. And I think it's really important that we share our fears and insecurities openly with our partners.
I think you're touching on something important there, Darby, with that. I need a hug because, as I say, I don't want to forget the side of physical intimacy is an important part of the equation. And so, when we're looking for and seeking that connection, instead of almost like holding in that we're longing for that connection, to name it out loud and also know that physical touch may not necessarily be just sex in terms of physical intimacy or sexual intimacy. It may be, I need that hug, or I miss kissing. I miss making out with you. I miss, soft touch and soft affection between us. And so expressing the need and the want for that and connecting in those ways that may or may not lead to sexual intimacy, and not just sex in terms of intercourse. And that's where I say sexual intimacy, because it might be other forms of sexual touch that, it's not just about that. It is also about physical touch beyond that and affection, as I was saying.
Absolutely. And I think that when we feel that our relationship is sort of drifting apart, whether we're not having enough of that physical kind of contact or sexual contact or emotional contact, I think that we need to sort of talk about it in a nice, positive way. And I know that sometimes what happens with couples is, somebody will say, well, we haven't had sex in like, 2 weeks and we have to have it right now. Um, well, that is a fair sort of assumption and desire. It's not the nicest way of making that request. Like, so how can we feel safe together and comforted together so that then that can create the safety and the opportunities to having more physical and or sexual sort of contact. And I think that if we do something like, say something like that, which feels sort of more like a demand, I think that we also need to figure out how we can make amends. Like that their thought and their feeling is absolutely valid. I need that. But sometimes the way we say things, we need to do things a little bit gentler, a little bit kinder.
Yeah. Yeah. I do see that sometimes couples will, um, and I don't know if you see this too, sometimes couples will share that I don't feel like opening up emotionally because we're not having sex. I don't want to talk about
Mhm.
my feelings because I feel so disconnected. I feel like I don't know this person. So it's usually that partner that needs the physical connection first. And there's often another partner who may feel like, well, I don't feel like having sex because you haven't listened to my day or you don't know anything that's going on with me. And so there isn't that emotional intimacy. So they're, not feeling open to the physical intimacy. And so some of the tips and strategies that we're getting into is how to balance these wants. And so not essentially holding each other hostage by saying, if I'm not getting what I want, then I'm not going to give you. It's breaking it down to, can we start both participating in giving and contributing to the intimacy that the other person is looking for, contributing to the intimacy overall in the relationship.
Mhm.
Is there
Um,
anything that you want to add from seeing that in couples that you're working with, Darby?
I think it's exactly that. It's that sort of feeling that sometimes they get into these dialogues, well, I'm not going to give you this if you don't give me this. And that's a very hard mind shift to get to, because now we're playing tit for tat instead of really sort of being ourselves with our partners, right? And I think it's really important that we are open to expressing ourselves physically, sexually, as well as emotionally. Um, but we have to be sensitive to what's going on with our partners.
Yeah.
Especially if, we're older and our bodies are changing and behaving differently. We need to be sensitive to that. Um, and, again, not to get too far off topic, I think that sometimes we do need to sort of think about what it means to have sex. Like you had said before, like it's not always just about intercourse. There are lots of different ways that we can pleasure our partners, to create that intimacy and that
Yeah,
connection.
yeah, exactly. And as you touch on that piece around aging and the body's changing, it's not always aging. Sometimes because I have that perinatal focus in my practice, I see a lot of this in trying to conceive. If we're struggling with fertility, sometimes that may change our level of intimacy. Sometimes just getting married and the pressures and responsibilities that go along with that, or living together, can also create, there's these like, transition points that can sometimes disrupt our sex lives.
Right.
And then postpartum, of course, is a big one that I see that may change erogenous zones, that may change, you're feeling touched out. And so, I think the conversation around sex, as you mentioned earlier, is an important piece. And if someone is struggling, I've worked with couples who didn't know their partner was feeling pain after sex, after having a baby, didn't know that, that was something that they were working through. And so to start the conversations about sex may give you a pathway forward rather than just feeling like this person doesn't desire me or want sex the way that I want sex. It's very natural that there's a partner who has less of a desire for sex and a partner who's higher, and that gap may be different from couple to couple. And there's no healthy way in terms of frequency of sex, those kinds of things. It's
Mhm.
just that it works for you. You want to make sure that you're both satisfied with the intimacy levels in your relationship, whether
Right.
that's emotional or physical.
Absolutely. And I think, this emotional sort of intimacy isn't built overnight, and if we do have a falling out, if you will, right? I mean, I think it takes a while to sort of practice getting back and trusting and believing again, right? And I think it's really difficult because we have a lot on our plates, work, kids, school, whatever, right? So there's so many things that distract us or steal our energy away, right? And we need to figure out how we can strengthen the things that we need to do in order to feel good ourselves, as well as to help our partners also feel like the relationship is getting deeper and more fulfilling. Right? We want to be able to see our partners, warts and all, and hear our partners and value our partners. Right? We're not all perfect, but we do want to be able to make everybody feel like they're acknowledged and important. Which brings us to our next sort of topic in 2 weeks. Episode 18, we'll be talking about fighting fair, turning conflict into connection. And once again, if you have any questions or comments, or you would like to suggest a topic that we could discuss, please feel free to send us an email at darbycamilla@gmail.com. Thanks. Bye-bye for now.